Hey, it's Scott Darby Bonsai. Today we're going to look at the Canon EOS M50 settings in detail, how I have it configured for my hybrid photography and videography stuff. Let's get started. You first buy an M50, what you probably want to do is disable the guided mode. Show you what it looks like when you first start the camera. It'll look like this. It's fine, but I prefer the standard menu system. And it looks like this. I also disable mode guide and also the feature guide. The feature guide, it can be useful. Maybe go once over, use that and see what it tells you about each setting, but overall it's not super helpful. Of course, this depends on you, but I use RAW for my photography. You can also do JPEGs at the same time, but that would potentially use a little bit more battery power, so I just do RAW most of the time. There is a compressed RAW if you want to use that, but that's even less supported than the regular type, so I just use the standard one. It's disorienting to me with the electronic viewfinders to have any type of image review going, so I have that off. It's just not something I like to have review show up on the EVF. Lens aberration correction. Some of these might pertain to the RAW. I think this digital lens optimizer might, but everything else really doesn't matter. If you have it on with RAW photos, you can do that in the Canon software afterwards if you want. I just do this all off because it's potentially a little bit faster. Next page, ISO settings. This doesn't really matter, but usually have it in 100, 6400 for the auto. You probably want to actually bump this up a little bit because this camera is not amazingly great at high ISO. It really depends on you and what you're doing at the time. Same thing for video. I do the lowest in this case, especially with video. You'll get a lot of grain and noise on this camera. Auto light optimizer, have that disabled. I don't want any features messing with my videos or photos. Same thing with the highlight tone priority, I have that off. Next page, metering is all standard, nothing really to change there. Next one, pretty standard here, I didn't change too much, but the picture style, it really depends on you, what you're trying to do at the time. This, at least in my case, this only applies to my video stuff, not the photos with the RAWs. But if you shoot JPEG, you probably want to adjust these settings quite a bit. In my case, let me go into detail. Looked at online some general suggestions. I have found with the M50 in video mode, the default for sharpness is way too high. I had a lot of my videos in the past with super high default sharpness. Doesn't look too good. It's very digital, but I crank that down. You can always adjust that in post-processing for videos. Same thing for JPEG photos. Pretty standard. Not too much adjusted. These ones up here, I lower these, but really depends on what you prefer. Next page, we've got the touch and drag autofocus settings. These are very important in my opinion. It's a quick way to adjust your autofocus point when you use the electronic viewfinder. So I have that enabled. Absolute positioning, and I use this area of the screen. So top left, you have a lot of options. Depends on which eye you use, it really depends on you, but I prefer the top left. Next page. These settings change so much, especially when I do photos and videos on the same camera. It doesn't really matter, we'll get to this a little bit later with the custom buttons. On this page here, we have the Lensatronic manual focus option. So with the lenses that have a electronic focus adjust, you can basically have it work or not work after you get focus. Normally when you're in autofocus mode, I have it disabled, but that can potentially be helpful to you depending on how you use your camera in photo situations. So you get focus and then you adjust a little bit with the focus ring. I just have it off because it might get in my way at some point. And I really just want to use autofocus a lot of the time. Autofocus assist beam firing, I have this off. I don't like it in many situations. There are a few situations it might be useful, but most of the time I don't want it going off. Peaking settings we got here, I always have these enabled. So we've got on, we have the level of high and the color of red. This depends on your scene. Sometimes you want to adjust the color to make it easier to see, but red generally for me works pretty well. Image stabilization settings, I usually have these on, but for this video I just turned it off to save a little bit of power. But same thing for video, I have these disabled most of the time. In some situations I will enable the digital IS for video, but most of the time not so much. Next page, video settings, I usually try to use 24 frames a second, 1080p, but that depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you want some slow motion, you can do the 30 frames a second or the 60 frames a second, depending on how much you want. The 30 frames a second, when you render at 24p, does give you a little bit of slow motion, just a tiny bit, but the same thing with the 60 frames, it's actually not too bad. So I normally just do 24 frames a second. I have this auto slow shutter disabled. I don't want the camera messing with my settings, especially as I shoot full manual with my video the vast majority of the time. Also with sound recording, this is normally where I have my levels adjusted about. Depends on your microphone, but it's around there, maybe even a little bit quieter, depending, but you do not want to peak your audio. And I think you generally want to hit around 12, but I usually tend to go even lower than that. So you can always adjust it in post-processing. You just don't want to use a really tiny bit of your area for data because you'll essentially just lose some quality. You just don't want to peak on that side. And I have these disabled most of the time. Now if I'm doing full auto, no microphone, I'll just have everything automatic. I'll have these enabled or automatic in that case. In the wireless communication settings, I do use this quite a bit, but it really depends on the situation. Main thing, I put the nickname in for my two M50s so I know which one is which. Sometimes it's helpful. There are a lot of economy options on the camera. I tend to have those off, but in some situations I will enable them to get more battery power. A lot of viewfinder settings in here. So I have this set up to be more efficient at the moment. We'll look at the settings, but all of these, this really depends on your situation. You can adjust what you want on the screen for all of these multiple screens. You cycle through them with the info button. Same thing for the viewfinder, it has a few you can enable for each one. You do have a grid setting, depends on the situation. I actually have the grid enabled on the camera filming so I could kind of align things. So it is definitely helpful in some situations. Display performance, this basically gives you more battery power if you don't care about frames per second in your viewfinder. It can be helpful. I have it enabled at the moment for power savings, but if you want the smoother viewfinder, have that enabled. Viewfinder display format, this depends on the situation, but I have it enabled on the second display mode. It crops in or jumps in a little bit on the viewfinder. You can see the difference in the cycle. So in this one, that's a standard, but for people with glasses, I think this is a little bit more useful in some situations because you don't have to strain as much trying to see everything, and it's just a little bit easier, I think, to use sometimes. Probably potentially a little bit more efficient on the battery as well. So display settings, I have it set to manual and screen. This really depends on your situation, but we'll get to the buttons and why I do that. So here's a very important area of the camera for settings, the custom functions. Go in here, all the buttons you can adjust. This is how I have it set currently. I don't change a lot of them at the moment, but you can see you can adjust some of the settings more than others. So with the main button you can have autofocus or just do metering and autofocus lock. I have that standard. Same thing with this one, I wish there were more options for this button. So I just leave it standard because I don't really need any of those based on my configuration. Now this one is the top button, MFN button. I have that currently set to switch between the viewfinder and the screen. It's a little quicker, in my opinion, than using the automatic switcher. This one here, the movie button, this only applies to photo modes. So I have this custom to the depth of field preview. Just do a quick example of that. Let's adjust things a little bit here. So this lens is not the greatest to show that off, but you can see that it is adjusting the aperture as I press the movie button. I leave exposure compensation as it is. I leave autofocus, manual focus as it is. This one I change. Now this is probably one of the better setups that I've found because I change autofocus settings so much. These two here are important to me. So it's changing this flash and this trash icon to do two different settings. One is the autofocus method for this and also the trash. This one's not as important to me, but I have that set up to switch between the servo and the standard one shot. For example, I'm in a photo mode, I want to do video, I can switch it like that, and I can easily press this side button quickly instead of having to go here and then go here and go like that. I can just press this button, it cycles through them because it's a button to do that cycling. So really quick, or at least the quickest way that I've figured out to change the autofocus method here. So photo mode, switch, boop, and it goes into what I use for video. It's really the best I've found, and it would only work on this or this based on how the controls are set up. So I really think that's the most important thing to take away from this entire video is this setup right here. Super useful. Same thing, trash icon. Let me go back into a photo mode. As you can see, it's adjusting that in case you want to do action photography very quickly, and just use the trash icon. That's about it for my custom settings. Let me just go over these other ones. The first one, I would like to have more ISO options, so I just have that enabled. I really don't use super high ISO stuff, but there is always the potential to use it. Release shutter without lens, I have this enabled. I do use manual glass, adapted glass, and you need to have that enabled for those to work. Project lens on power off, I have this enabled, but you can disable it for standard native lenses in this lineup, like the 22 and 32mm lens. And for some situations, it might be faster to have this disabled. You just have to be careful with the lens. Talk a little bit about the My Menu settings. Give you a few ideas. This really depends on you. I don't find these extremely useful, but there are definitely ways you can use this to be more efficient. I have two different tabs here set up just as an example. First one is mostly focus settings. So if you want to quickly get to touch and drag or picking settings, you can put them in a group here. So I go into the configuration of this first tab. You can adjust the order. You can add things to it. So if I wanted to add something else, go in there. You can also change the name of it. I have this one named Focus. So I don't know if this is super useful to put these settings together, but that is one idea. The other one I had was for power. I think this one is more useful in these situations, especially with the battery on the M50. If you want to make your camera super efficient, got most of the settings here for quickly accessing when you want to do that. You can go into each one, change these to make it more efficient, or if you don't care, you can make it stay longer so it's more convenient. And then eco mode, I think that changes the display automatically, the brightness. And here we've got the power saving or smooth viewfinder. that one definitely will use more or less power. The image stabilization settings that potentially would use more power having it on. And also viewfinder format, I think it would be a little bit more efficient to use this one potentially. In aberration things, you want to disable those probably to make it slightly more efficient, just assuming. I also look at the Canon EOS M50 settings in detail, how I have things configured, all the ways to improve power efficiency a little bit, adjust the buttons to have them work potentially better for what you do or what I do with the photography, the videography stuff. Of course, you can configure things how you want in different situations. It really depends on what you're doing at the time, but that's just generally what I tend to do with this camera. With the My Menu stuff, it really depends. You can adjust things to put things in groups. I don't see it super useful, but it does have its uses at times. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. Likes and shares help out a lot as well. Thanks again.